From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
And we have returned. Before I take us to Central America, where our second story takes place, I would like to make a public service announcement for all our fellow conspiracy realists who are not yet aware of this. Leonard Nimoy is known as an actor, right? Famously playing Spock on the Star Trek franchise. But he is also a musician. He doesn't get enough credit. And I know there's a question on a lot of people's minds right now. What is the album Two Sides of Leonard Nimoy about? Well, let's dispel the myths right here. It's not necessarily about him being Spock, but it is a continuation of his earlier album, Spock and Space, which is his debut album. Okay, so now I think we've cleared that up. Right? Everybody could breathe a little bit easier. Tensions were running high.
I was
concerned. Discussing this.
In the middle of the earth, in the land of the Shire.
It's been a weird weekend. Yes.
You can't stop it, Bilbo. Bilbo Baggins.
Yes.
King of the wild frontier. No,
it's close, though. It is close sonically. So do check that out. It does verge into levels of Shatner-esque Rocket Man greatness. But while you are checking that out, and while you are feverishly downloading the album on your platform of choice, journey with us to something completely unrelated, as far as I know, which is El Salvador. So previously we reported on some pretty horrific things in El Salvador, and I realized that this country, being a relatively small place, doesn't get a lot of news coverage, so I didn't want to leave us all with this this skewed negative view of El Salvador, especially for anybody who's never been there. So I'd like to explore this one. El Salvador may be one of the vanguards, one of the heralds of a new age in currency. As we record, El Salvador is set to become the world's first nation to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. This could be big. This could be weird. But initially, just off that headline, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts?
I mean,
good for holders of Bitcoin.
Well, yeah,
sort of. I mean, it's so weird, the whole scene with the crypto thing. Like a word from Elon Musk can like tank it in a day. You know, it's a little bit sketchy. And news like this, you know, what's the deal with the government of El Salvador? Isn't it considered somewhat corrupt? Or isn't that an issue?
Well, yes, that is correct. Depending on, especially if you listen to the political opponents. But then the more cynical of us in the audience could easily argue that every government is to a degree corrupt. Even the really, really squeaky clean ones like Singapore. But in this case...
Is that a joke?
What?
Was that a joke?
Well, yeah. Well, no, kind of. It depends on what kind of corruption we're talking about. Are you talking about a country where it's like accepted to bribe police? That's a standard operating procedure. Or are we talking about a country like the U.S., where private contractors make billions of dollars a year based entirely on nepotism and their relationship with politicians?
DynCorp.
No, it's totally a good point, Ben. I mean, there's corruption comes in many shapes and flavors. And I guess when I think of the types of corruption that exists in maybe some South American countries like that, I think it's a little more off the books, greasing palms, people trying to enrich themselves by making backroom deals. But then you're right. When I say that out loud, how is that any different than just the more official version of it that happens here in the United States? It's really not. So point taken, Ben. Point taken.
May I just jump back to you? You asked that question earlier, Ben, and I'm sorry, I've been thinking about it. Like, what do we actually think about all of this? My initial thought was, how do you get enough El Salvadorians, or like just the citizens of El Salvador, to adopt Bitcoin to make this, I don't know, worthy of a major announcement, worthy of a major push to incorporate Bitcoin along with, US dollars as their legal tender? Like how do you do that? And it seems as though what you're going to tell us here is that there's a partnership of some kind that's happening beyond just announcing that, hey, we're going to accept Bitcoin now as legal tender.
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're spot on. The US dollar is legal tender in El Salvador. And for people who are supporting this plan, a huge factor in their logic is the commission fees on remittances abroad. So if someone is sending money from a different country to El Salvador, just wiring it down, then those commissions on just moving the money around can cover like 20% of the principal cost. So with a decentralized currency, the idea would be for the average person that you can maybe cut down on some of those fees. And then, like you said, Noel, for the people who are more like altcoin enthusiasts, they're very interested in the technological aspects of it. This is a great science experiment. Now, will it work out? Goes back to how you feel about the government, because yes, El Salvador has had a lot of criticism for the current administration. And then also, this is completely new territory. It's kind of surprising that El Salvador would be the first country to step into the future here. And the question is, are they going to be in an advantageous position, or are they going to be more like guinea pigs at this point?
But I guess what I was getting at, though, is some of the criticism behind adoption of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies in general is that it's so easy to use for like money laundering. It's so easy to use for illegal activities. And that's, I think, what I was asking. And I'm sorry if it's a silly question, but I just wonder is that the impetus behind this? If there is corruption in the government, to accept it as legal tender to muddy the waters of currency so that it'll be easier to perpetrate these types of frauds and felonies?
Yeah, I mean, that's valid for sure. There is a big piece of this conversation that we have to give some air to, which is El Salvador, like many other poorer countries, has at times run into tensions with the world's monetary system as it stands now, most particularly the IMF, International Monetary Fund. And Bitcoin could be seen as a way to escape the policies of the IMF because they're using a different currency. Just a few days before we recorded this, I believe over the weekend, the Bitcoin community itself spoke out, and they may be planning to loan El Salvador $1 billion worth of Bitcoin to help them fully adopt this as a legal tender. And they did this in response to the IMF, who said, we've got some concerns. This will be a banking nightmare. So what we may see happening is a confrontation in Central America between the old financial guard, the Black Monday murders types, and then the new, tech literati. Techerati? There's a word like that. Yeah. And I'm really interested to see how this works out. And I would be astonished if world leaders and economists are not also paying attention, because one of the ways that you enforce sovereignty and hegemony is through having people use your money. That's why the US is so into being a reserve currency, and that's why France instigated the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, because they wanted to control the African franc, or keep control of it.
No. This is really interesting to me, Ben. This is the first time I'm hearing about this. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I had no idea that El Salvador they are working with this company Strike, or an app called Strike through a different company. But when they introduced this and launched mobile payments in El Salvador, like specifically, according to CNBC, Strike became the most downloaded app in the country.
Yes.
So there's definitely an appetite for it within amongst the citizens. And did you mention the 70% number?
We did not. Lay it on us.
this is an article that you posted here, Ben. According to CNBC, 70% roughly of El Salvadorian citizens do not have bank accounts, and they operate in cash-only transactions. And I can totally imagine that having, a Bitcoin account on your phone could, in a lot of ways, seem more secure. And if you could, just perform daily transactions through your phone with your Bitcoin, then I can imagine that being a big deal and people would actually enjoy it.
Yeah, because you wouldn't have to go through some of the hassles that you encounter with physical currency, right? So if you are getting money wired in and you live in El Salvador, then you might get hit with a ton of fees, like 10% or more. These transfers can take days to arrive, and then sometimes you have to go there in person to physically pick up the cash. And just to set the stage a little bit further with statistics, one really important part of the conversation here is just how much of El Salvador's GDP is remittances. So people travel to other countries, they work, they send money back to their families and their loved ones. That alone is 20% of El Salvador's gross domestic product.
Wow, it's fascinating. There's a couple of other interesting little side stories connected to this. Like, for one, since 2019, this one particular area in El Salvador called El Zonte has been using Bitcoin as legal tender. It's referred to as Bitcoin Beach. And it was a program that was going to kind of like almost pilot the idea of using Bitcoin as legal tender. They referred to it as a mission to build a, quote, a sustainable Bitcoin economic ecosystem on the coast of El Salvador. There's more than 50 different vendors that accept it there, everything from hotels to restaurants to surf instructor camps to, fruit stands, hardware stores, anything you can think of pretty much. And this is my favorite little side story. Apparently, the current president of El Salvador, who's only 39 years old, his name is, forgive me for butchering his pronunciation, Nayib Bukele, I believe. He is kind of behind this, and he has done this thing where he is creating this idea of mining sustainably and cheaply, mining Bitcoin. As we know, it uses lots of electricity and causes lots of controversy in terms of the sustainability of it and the effects on the environment. He wants to use geothermal energy generated from volcanoes in El Salvador to create 100% clean, this was his words, not mine, 100% renewable, zero emissions energy to mine Bitcoin with.
Yeah, which is, it's an interesting idea, but we'll see how close it comes to being reality. There's something else that has a lot of people worried, and I'd love to hear what the Bitcoin enthusiasts in the crowd today think about this. What happens when Bitcoin reaches its limit? Unlike other currencies, Bitcoin is designed for some degree of scarcity. I believe there are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins total. So when we talk about cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin is, the gold standard, by which I mean it's the coin that most people are going to be most familiar with, we're also talking about possibilities for risk. Like the US dollar has predictability because it's a reserve currency, because everybody around the world decided to agree with little or no backing that those coupons counted for specific values. What happens if Bitcoin skyrockets in value? What happens if it plummets in value? What will, the average person in El Salvador do? How will it affect them? Those are really serious questions that, I think bear some research. This is definitely jumping into the deep water without putting your toe in first, aside from the village mentioned earlier.
Well, and we know it does do that thing, Ben. Like, it does. It can skyrocket. Everyone gets really excited, and it can absolutely plummet with just a word from, say, Elon Musk on Saturday Night Live. And the confidence in it is a lot harder to measure, I would say, than maybe the stock market. But it's a fascinating development, I would say, and very meaningful, and I think potentially a political sort of middle finger to the United States.
Well, that could be seen as part of it, but it's definitely, I would say, if it's a middle finger to someone, it's less the U.S. because the U.S. dollar will still be used and accepted. It's more a middle finger to those international banking institutions, which are themselves, enormously controversial. You'll hear critics, for instance, say that the IMF is an instrument of resource extraction or an instrument of financial enslavement. Again, those are not our statements. Those are from the opponents of these outfits. So to the opponents of these institutions, the argument is something like they're putting entire countries in debt bondage, and then they're using that as a tool of leverage to influence the policies that get written, the direction of the government, and perhaps most importantly, how the government interacts with international private corporations. That's where you get into deep water. So maybe El Salvador is able to break what some see as global financial chains, but then also El Salvador may be putting itself in a profound risk for instability. That's where the story stands now, and you'll have a lot of people on either side of the argument, but we would like to hear from you. If you've been to El Salvador, if you've traveled around Central America, if you live in El Salvador, what are people saying about this on the ground? Do people believe that this is a conspiracy of sorts? I'm sure they do. I'd just love to hear some firsthand reporting of it. So hit us up, as always, 1-833-STD-WYTK, conspiracy@iheartmedia.com. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors. We'll be back with one more piece of strange news.